everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this video is an Express masterclass with liquid templating. So the point of this video is to kind of show you the ins and outs of Express with liquid templating. Okay, so yeah, let's do that. So Express, again, let's talk about what Express is first. Express is probably the most popular backend framework in Node JavaScript. So when you're writing code in Node with JavaScript, Express is sort of the biggest of the frameworks for creating a web server. Okay, and again, basically what a web server is, it's a piece of software that listens on a server, a computer somewhere. And every computer communicates with other computers over a TCP, Transmission Control Protocol. And every computer can have software listen for messages on different ports. This could be port like 1 through like 65,000. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna have 65,000 things listening, but the port is signified by a number, and then it listens for messages being sent to that number. So that's kind of how it works. Like basically, it's kind of like I would only notice messages that came to my address box. Even if someone puts in the wrong mail in my box, if it's not addressed to me, I'm not going to look at it. So same thing with like TCP messages. Okay, so that's essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create a piece of software that's going to listen for those messages on our computer. Okay, but theoretically this could be put on any computer and you would just send that message to that IP address, to the right port and whatnot. So let's see how this is all set up. So to do all this, you do need to have Node.js installed. So you do need to have Node.js installed, so make sure you install the latest version. That's generally what I use, so that way you follow along with me line by line. You can always check what version you have by just doing like a node -- version, and that'll tell you which version you have. Cool. Now, right now I've opened up this folder that I'm going to be working out of, so I have an empty folder that your VS Code is open to for you to do the work. And what I'm going to do is create a new Node project. So Node, what we want to do is create a new project. That's going to allow us to install dependencies for this project, track little details for this project. And the way you do that is you do npm init -y. The -y is very important. If not, it's going to ask you a bunch of questions, and you're just going to have to hit enter through all of them. But I do npm init -y, which just means automatically say yes to all the questions. So I do that, and what that's going to do is that Node is going to generate a package.json. A package.json is in Node sort of the file that tells Node everything about your project. And again, this is a Node project, so this is not your standard, this is not a front-end JavaScript project. Technically, we're working in the back end. Our server works outside the browser. So again, you have details here. And generally want to change this main here to a server.js, because typically if you're doing a web server, you want to have your sort of main file be server.js. You don't have to, but that's just typically what's standard. So we'll create that file, server.js. Now, the thing is that I need to actually have the Express library in order for me to do Express. So let's install Express. So I would just do npm install Express. Cool. And what you'll notice is that when I did that install, npm install express, it installs it. It looks for my package.json, assuming that I did it. I'm doing that command in the same folder as my project. Okay, I don't want to be doing it in some other folder where my project is not located. So you should always run your install commands in the same folder as your package.json. Okay, but notice it tracks the dependencies. So I installed it, and now it knows that a dependency of my project is Express. Wonderful. And then that folder gets installed here in Node Modules. Now this folder is Node Modules folder where the actual code is installed. You generally do not want to push up the GitHub. So what you do is you'll create a, what you want to do is create a git ignore file. So it's .git ignore file. And this will tell your Git, if you're using Git for version control, to ignore certain files. So I'm going to say, hey, ignore the Node Modules folder. And then that'll ignore it for Git purposes. So it won't get committed, it won't get pushed up, it'll just be ignored. Okay, so that's all well and good. Now, we can start setting up Express. So first thing you do is we want to bring in the library. So what you do is we create a variable to hold the library. So in this case, generally you want to call out whatever the name of the library is. So const express equals require express. Okay, require express. Nice. So that's us bringing in the Express library. So we're going to import the Express library. Now what we want to do is, the way our server is, we're going to create an application that represents our server. We need to create that using Express by saying we create a variable to hold it. So we'll say const app equals Express. And we run this Express function that creates a new app object, and now our application is here. Create our app object. And if we want to turn on our server, that app object has several functions to turn on the server. So at the very end of your script, what we want to do is turn on the listener, which is app.listen, and then you're going to give it a port number. Again, it could be anywhere between 1 and 65,000. So you could do 65,000. We'll do it just for giggles, but usually anything 3,000 and up. The only number I would really avoid is 6,000. For some reason, the browsers like to ignore 6,000. And generally, 80 and I'm forgetting what the other one is. But generally, if you stay above 3,000, you'll be fine. Stay above 3,000 and avoid 6,000, and you're good. Okay. So in this case, we'll do 65,000 just to show you that you can. I could actually start something on port 65,000. Okay. And then what happens is you can have a function, a callback, that runs after the server starts. So generally, you're going to use this callback just to kind of put out a message saying, hey, just so you know, the server started. So you do something like this. You do console.log server listening on port 65,000. So that's it. Technically, I've created the web server. We did the thing. Okay. So now if I do node and I run that server.js file, okay, and then I go to localhost. Localhost always means my computer. So I'm saying, send a message to my computer. And then you put the colon, and then you can say what port you're sending it to. I want to send it to port 65,000. And there we go. Okay, you get this cannot get. This is a good thing. It looks like it's an error, but it's a good thing, because this is an error generated by Express, which means Express is running. So that's a good sign. Because see, if I turn off Express, so I go here and I turn off the server by doing Control-C, and that will kill the server. Okay, if I refresh, then I get this error. This error means nothing's going on. So this error is coming from Chrome, telling me it got nothing back. Okay. Now that error we saw before, where it said like cannot get, just means that like it tried to make a request for a particular URL, and the server doesn't know, like, you know, it's like going to a restaurant, ordering something that's not on the menu. Okay, the restaurant's gonna be like, I don't know what you're asking me for. I don't know. Pastrami sandwich isn't on the menu. Why are you asking me for this? That's what that cannot get or cannot whatever error means. It just means like you ask for something that this server doesn't give. And which makes sense, because our server currently gives nothing. Okay, all our server does is turn on. Okay, but that's it. Basically what we did is we created this little server application. That server application is listening on a TCP port, in this case 65,000. So anytime the browser sends a message to that port on my computer, that software is there listening for that message, and then will respond to that message. And that's pretty much how web servers work. They listen, a request comes in, and then they send the response. Okay, so that's all fun and good. Now let's make some, how can we actually craft responses? Generally your responses are called routes. Okay, so you create routes. So, and there's different verbs that requests can come in. Typically when I type a URL in the browser window, that's going to come in as a GET request. It's by default, that's always a GET request. So if I want to do a response to a GET request, I could do app.get, and then you take two arguments. The first argument is, where are you making the request 2, so I'm making a request to slash. Slash always means the root route, so technically localhost 65,000 would be slash. It's the main URL. And then you pass in a function as a second argument that is like, hey, if this is what the user asked for, run this function. So the user asks for this, then do this. Now this function takes 2 arguments, rec and res. Rec stands for request. And again, the naming it's just a naming convention. You can call the 2 things anything you want, but the first argument always represents the request object, which is the object with all the details about the request coming in. It's like having, you know, like when did the person put in the order? Like how did they feel when they put in the order? What kind of order did they put in? What did they order? All these kind of, like if you were a restaurant. The res object is the response object. This is going to be the object that has all the functions that allow us to send a response to that request. So in this case, all I really want to do is just send a response. So I do res.send, and I'll just send like hello world. Okay, save. Okay, so now actually let me run the server. npm nope, node server.js. So see the server's running, we got a little message. So now if I go over here and I refresh, see now I get hello world. Because even though you don't see it, technically that's slash. Because again, that URL that we put in there, we put in our route, represents what happens after this part. So this is called the host. So the URL is everything really after that. So when there's nothing, that's also the same as me doing this. So that's what this is referring to. It's saying, okay, well, when there's no other part to the URL, this is what you're going to do. Now, if I were to create another route, so app.get, and then we said like /cheese, rec res. Okay, and I do res.send cheese. Okay, if I were to do this, now what I have to do is that every time I run the server gets loaded, and then it never like reads my file again. So now that I've made changes to the JavaScript file, the server that's running is not going to know that I've made changes. So what I have to do is I have to turn off the server, turn it back on so it reads the file again and captures my changes. So now I can go to /cheese and see I see cheese when I go over to /cheese because that's the URL. That's the endpoint. Okay, so you see here what's happening is whenever this is a GET request, and a GET request is always, a browser always makes a GET request. So you type something in the URL bar and you hit enter, it makes a GET request. And then /cheese is the URL. If these 2 things match, then this function runs. So that's really all your backend server is. It's just a bunch of like, it's like being an air traffic controller. You're just saying, hey, like if these things match, do this. If these things match, do that. That's pretty much the extent of it. Now, we mentioned that there's this request object. And the request object allows you to get all sorts of information. Part of it is you can get information from the URL. So let's show you one way you can get information from the URL. So for example, I could do something like this, app.get, and we'll say like /food, and then I'm going to say /cheese /bread. Okay, so notice I put this colon in front of these parts of the URL. These are what's called a param, a URL parameter. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying parts of the URL that are variables that I want to grab. So what's going to happen is that whatever I write here in this part of the URL will be saved in a variable called cheese. Anything I put in this part of the variable will be saved in a variable called bread. And this part has to be food. So it has to be like food /something /something. That's what this means. So in that case, again, I do my function. And what I can do is I can access those params inside the request object. So just to show you, there's a response function called res.json. Res.json, instead of sending a string like res.send, will send data as JSON. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the request.params object and send that as JSON. So that way we can see like what the params are. Okay, so I'm going to stop the server and I'm going to restart it. Now you may be thinking, man, all this restarting the server gets really, really annoying. There is a way to avoid that. What you should do is npm install. Now you want to save this as a dev dependency, so you want to do --save -dev nodamon. And what nodamon does is that when you run the code with nodamon instead of just node, if you update your files, it restarts, it'll turn off your server and turn it back on automatically. So that way you don't have to do it. So now I can type in nodamon server.js. And see, now it's like listening for these, it's like listening to see, hey, are there changes in JavaScript files? So now if I go back over here and I'm going to do like /food / whatever cheese I want, so I'll say Munster, / some bread, so we'll say rye, and see I get back cheese, Munster, bread, rye. So that data from the URL gets saved in that params object. So again, that's what these params are. These colon cheese, colon bread. That's what designates that part of the URL as a variable. So that way I can pull data from the variable. But also there's rec.query. Okay, rec.query is where you can see URL queries. So see the difference. Okay, a query would be whenever you, at the end of the URL, you put a question mark, and then I would put like, let's say, let's do something different. Meat equals sausage, and sauce equals A1. Okay, and so notice the syntax here. The question mark is where the marks the beginning of the query. This is a key and its value. And then the and separates a separate key value pair. So this is the key, and this is the value. Okay, and see now I get meat and sauce, because what I'm sending back now is no longer the rec.params object, but the rec.query object. Okay, and I can get both. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll wrap both of these in an object and just say, okay, params equal rec.params and query equals rec.query. Okay. So let's see here. Now if I hit enter on this now, see the params are Munster and rye because those are in the URL, but the query is sausage and sauce because that's in the query, the URL query part of the URL. So basically Express makes accessing these parts pretty easy, a lot easier than most frameworks. So that's pretty pleasant. I can get those pieces of data pretty easily. Now there are other types of requests other than GET. So you might be like dealing with like a POST request. So let's say app.post. So instead of using app.get, I would use app.post because this route is supposed to be the response to a POST request. So we'll say like again /cheese. And you're like, wait a second, but didn't we already use /cheese? Well, this is a GET request to /cheese. This is for a POST request to /cheese. So when it's matching these, it's always like matching on both levels. Is the method the same? Is the URL the same? So again, I just do rec res. And a cool thing we can do when we're doing a POST request is send a request body. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say we're going to res.json, the rec.body, the request body. Now in order to access the request body, because the request body could be formatted as JSON, as XML, as URL encoded data, there's a bunch of different ways that body could look like. And Express is not going to just magically know to check for every single one. So what you do is we install little functions that run before our routes. These are known as middleware. Why are they called middleware? Because they happen in the middle. They come in, they happen after the request came into the server, but before we send the response. Okay? So generally the best thing to do is create another section up here called middleware. We always want our middleware before our routes, because generally these are going to be things we want to happen before the routes get hit. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to check to see if there's a request body. Specifically, we're going to say we want to check if there's a JSON or URL encode body. So there's two different middlewares. So to use a middleware, you do app.use, and then in here you're going to pass the function. So in this case, what we want to use is express.use JSON. And what this does is that if a body comes in that's using JSON formatting, that's going to catch it. And then save the data in rec.body. But other data comes in from like HTML forms, which is referred to as URL encoded data, which it looks more like a URL query. Now, if that's the case, what I want to do is parse that out. So we can use it's express.url encoded. Oops. Express.url encoded. And then we have to do like extended true. Okay. So, or false, either one. Doesn't really matter. Okay, but see, this is going to parse for JSON bodies. This will parse for a URL encoded body. So let's try that out. Okay, again, our server's restarting as we've been making updates. Okay. Oh, I thought it did. Oh, yeah, it's working now. Okay. So in this case, we can't make a post request with the browser. Okay, browser really, again, you put the URL in the bar, it's always get. So how can I test this out? This is where having something like Postman, Insomnia, in this case I'm going to use Thunder Client, can make life a lot easier. So what I do is I'll just open up localhost, or I'll just open up a new window here. And I'm going to get a screen like this, and then I'll try this out. I'll say localhost 6500. Again, localhost always means my computer, the computer that you're on. So 6500/cheese. We want to make a post request. And then I'm going to put some stuff in the body. So right now I'm going to do a JSON body. So let's just show you how that works. And see, it gives me back the body because, again, our route says to just respond with the request body. But I could also do a form, a URL form encoded body. Okay? So I could do something like cheese, hello, wah. And if I send this, well, that one didn't work. Let me think about that one. If I do it in this way. Yeah. So this is what we want for URL form encoded data. So this is form encoded data. This is multi-part form data, which is a conversation for another day. Okay, so again, because I have the right middleware for the right type of body, I'm able to break down that data and have access to it. So again, right now we have access to data in three ways. I can get data from the URL through params. I can get data through the query using rec.query, and I can get data from the body of the request using rec.body. But again, for the body of the request, I have to have the right middleware to parse the right kind of bodies. Okay? Cool. So now that's kind of like the basics of just writing routes in Express. So next what we're going to do is get into the actual templating or liquid side of things. So if I head over to LiquidJS.com, this is basically the JavaScript implementation of Liquid. Liquid is the templating language created by Shopify, which they're actually technically using Ruby on Rails, and it's technically working with Ruby, but this is like a JavaScript version of that, so that way you can use the Liquid syntax in your Node applications, which is really cool, because you may not do Shopify work yet, but you might end up meeting a client someday that does Shopify work, and this using Liquid here will help you easily transfer over to looking at Shopify code. Okay, now to make this easy to set up in Express, there is a library we can use. Okay, so we go to npmjs.com. There's a library that makes this a lot easier to use, called I think it's Express Liquid Views. Yep. Okay, and this library will make it a lot easier for us to set this up. We can just do it all in one line now. So let's try that out. So I'm going to stop the server, and now I'm going to install the library. So npm install Express Liquid Views. Oh, did I type that wrong? I think it's Liquid Express Views, right? Yep, Liquid Express Views. Always get it backwards. Okay, npm install Liquid Express Views. Cool. And this is what's referred to as a templating language. What this means is that's going to allow us to write templates that we can use to generate HTML pages. Okay. So we're not writing directly HTML pages. We could. What we could do is you could create another piece of middleware called app.use, and you would do express.static, and then you would name a folder. Typically, you would name a folder called public. And what that does, it allows you to statically serve files out of there. So as an example, if I were to create that folder and we call it public, and I were to create like a bread.html file, okay, and if I just do here, and then I just say, hey, like in this file, we're just gonna call it, say the word bread. Okay, I can access this file now that I've added that middleware. So now that I've added this line in my server.js, what happens is that when this line runs, it'll check to see if there's a file that matches the request. So if I were to now go to request 65,000 and then go to /bread.html, it's going to go look inside the static folder for a bread.html file. Although the server's not running, so that would help. Okay, oops, I keep running the install command again. There we go. Okay, and you see I get bread. So it's serving that file statically. So I could just use raw HTML files, but the thing is that like there's certain things you just don't know ahead of time because like data. So you want to like dynamically generate your HTML files, and that's what templating is for. It allows you to create like variables in your HTML that can be filled when the user makes the request, like user data, stuff like that. That way you don't have to make like a page with every different possibility. Okay, so to do that, generally what you need to do is make a folder called views. So we make a folder called views, and what we want to do is make a couple different files. They all have the extension called liquid, since we're using liquid. First file we want to make is like layout.liquid. Okay, and here we're just going to put our HTML boilerplate. So what I'm going to do is borrow that boilerplate from that bread.html. So I'm just going to copy this right over. Okay. And then here's kind of like where you'd want to put in like any like script tags to jQuery or Alpine or underscore or whatever that you want to use in the front end. Okay, and then what we can do here is we can scope out like a header. So this is where we can like make our navigation. And then maybe down here we'll put a footer. And that's where we can put a footer if we're going to use one. And then what I'm going to do is put in a main tag here. And then here I'm going to set up what's called a block. Okay. Okay. I think it's what, end block. I'm pretty sure that's what I want to do. Let me just go double check. So let's take a look at the liquid documentation. So what I would want to do is go to, for this place, I want to go to includes and layouts. So I'll scroll down here to the layouts page. Just make sure that it like, so block content and block. Okay, good. Good. So what this means, okay, what this means is that I've created a block called content, and I can generate content there. The reason why this is nice is that way I don't have to do all of this over and over again for every page. All I have to do is worry about what I want to go here, because I can extend this layout. Okay, I can sit there and say, hey, I want stuff here. So like, for example, in my header, we might put like H1 header, so we can see like, this is where the header of the page, put an H1 here for the footer of the page, just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Cool. So there's that file. And then what I'm going to do is create the file for like the page. Let's first like create a route. So I'm going to go back to my routes, and let's add a route that's actually going to use liquid. So let's just change our main page. So instead of res.send, which just sends text, we want to actually respond with a website. So what we do is we use res.render, okay, which is going to use whatever default templating engine you have configured. So we need to configure liquid. So the way you do that, okay, so let me just get rid of this line of code here. The way we do that is, on this line of code, we would make one slight difference. We would do this. We would do require. We would go bring in liquid express views. Okay. And what liquid express views does, it gives us a function. So what we want to do is call that function and pass it the call to express. So that way what it does, it's going to modify that application object. How it does it, we don't worry about it. it's going to just modify that so that way Liquid is working. So this way you don't have to like worry about configuring it. It just works. Okay. So that line right there will make sure that our application has been connected to the Liquid templating system. That templating system is our default templating system. So then here I'm going to say, hey, I want to render, we'll say index.liquid, which doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to say I want to render index.liquid. So watch this. I want to make a new file, index.liquid. Has to be in the views folder. Okay, guys, that's where it's going to look. It's built to look in the views folder. Okay, index.liquid. And here I'm just going to say, like, you know, div h1. This is from the index.liquid file. So let's try that out now. So if I go back to the main page now, see, I get the h1. This is from, but where's that header and footer? Because I need to actually like say that that belongs in that layout. Okay, so the way we would do that is we would first put this block here. We'd say like percentage here, and it's like extends layout dot liquid. And notice that anytime I do these commands, I'm always using like this syntax here, like this curly bracket percentage sign. That's how syntax works. And what this means is that this page, certain things will be used to inject into here. So then what I do is I'll wrap this block here. I'll say percentage. And it's going to say block content. And then again, we'll put the end block right below it. And block. And since I'm saying that this all belongs in content, it knows that all this should then get injected right here where this block is. So now watch what happens when I refresh. Oh, I get an error. Tag extends. Okay, maybe I used the wrong word. Let's see here. Layout. Oh, okay, I see. This is what we want to use. Oh, so many templating languages in my head. I think I was thinking Jinja, which is the Python language. Layout, default layout. Okay, so it's just, we just write the word layout. So let me just go back over here to the index. And then this would just be layout. And then this is the quotation marks of the one. Let's try that again. And see, that works. And see, now the header and the footer are there. Okay, so I don't have to like, I can just make a universal navigation bar and a universal footer bar, even though there's like different pages, because I can keep extending the layout from page to page. That's not the only cool thing I can do with Liquid. What I can also do is send it data. So when I use these res.render functions, I can send data to the template. So let's say I send, we'll just say I'm going to send I send an object as a second argument, and then I can send any data I want with any name that I want. So we'll just call it like ducks, and we'll put like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Okay, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. So this array will then get passed down to the template, and I can now use it. So I might want to do something like this. I might say like UL, have a UL, and then what I want to do is loop over that array. So I can do like percentage for duck. I think it's in ducks percentage, because I think in Liquid it uses a for in loop. Let's just double check. Okay, and intro the Liquid. Where am I looking for? I think I'm looking at tags. Oh, actually, I think where I was fine. Oh, here we go, for. Okay, so see for product in, yep, so that's an in. So in that case, it would be that starts the loop, and then this ends the loop, N4. So basically, I'm looping on whatever's in the middle. So I can just be like, you know, we'll just do an H2 or an LI that has the particular duck, because again, we're looping over the array of ducks that was passed in, because again, we passed in the array of ducks in this object. So now I am looping over that. Each time I loop over it, I have one duck. So what I can do is I can inject the variable with double curly brackets and say duck. And now if I refresh the page, see there's Huey, Dewey, and Lois, although it's Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Oh well. Okay. And there you see, like we can easily generate a lot of HTML for a list of things. Okay, that's pretty nice. And this is all done on the server side. So unlike using like jQuery, where jQuery is running in the browser and generating all those DOM nodes while the browser is running, what this does is actually generating the HTML before it ever actually gets to the browser. So basically, I'm going to the page, a message is being sent to the server hears it, generates an HTML file. So if you want to see what the browser actually got, I can go here and I can go to sources and take a look at the index.html that was sent over. And notice, if I look at it, see the file that the browser received, the LIs already exist. So none of that liquid syntax is in there. So this is referred to as server-side rendering. The page is being rendered on the server, not on the client in the browser. Okay, client-side routing would mean like things that we do in like jQuery or things that we do in React. Those are client-side pieces. This is on the server. But this is really cool because when it comes to like sort of the initial look of things, we can just kind of handle that with server-side templating. And then I could, if I need to do some client-side stuff like make a button clickable or whatnot, again, I can go back to my layout and then put in a script tag for jQuery, put a script tag for Alpine, put a script tag for HTMX, put a script tag for whatever I need to use on the page, or a CSS library or something like that. So this is essentially the idea of like working with Liquid and Express. Again, Liquid has a bunch of other cool stuff you can do. So you can do if statements to make things conditional. You can other cool things you can do is if we go to tags, already in tags, filters. There's all these filters that you can use when you inject variables that allow you to manipulate a variable for things like converting a date. So let's see here, date. So if you were injecting a date, you can like set it up in a nice format right easily without having to worry about like bringing in all these date libraries. You know, if you want to grab the first thing out of an array, or there's a lot of different cool what's called filters that make it easy to work with your variables without having to do a lot of pre-processing on the server. So this is Liquid. Again, this is us applying the Liquid templating language in Express. So hopefully this gave you an idea of how to use. And again, this templating language Liquid could be used in any other Node framework. You could go adapt it into Koa or Fastify, but this particular video is all about Express and Liquid. My name is Alex Brissett from alexbrissettcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.